Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about the goals that I'm setting for myself for 2025 for reading plan goals for 2025. Why did that not come out right? This year. It's still 2024 when I'm filming this. But I'm thinking about 2025, so bear with me. For 2024, I had set my goals to read 200 books. I also had decided to do my local library's reading challenge where you read 116 books to fit different prompts. I had also wanted to read the books from my own shelves, and I also wanted to finish some series. So the check-in for that, and I'm actually going to do like a stats and check-in, like a 2024 review, so we'll talk a little bit more about this. I did finish the library reading challenge. I did not reach my 200 book goal, but I already knew going into it that that was insane, and I only ended up changing my goal to 200 books after talking to my sister, and she said she normally reads about that much every year. So I was like, at the beginning of the year we were kind of joking around, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna compete with her. And so I was still glad that I set my goal that high, but I do think that it definitely impacted the kinds of stuff that I read. I felt that if there were any books that kind of slowed me down, there's two sides of this. So on one hand, the negative side of that is that I felt that if there were any books that were kind of slow paced, that were slowing me down, that was going to take more than a few days to read, I would get pretty impatient with it. And so therefore, most classics were just out. I wasn't going to be able to read them because most classics you really do have to slow down. The language, large books, I would get really impatient with as well. But then on the other side is that I think that it helped me be more critical of books that I wasn't enjoying, and I was going to DNF and get rid of them. And that was really good. I have no hard feelings. I don't think that I made any bad decisions when I DNF'd a book. If it was, and I was very mindful of the reason I'm DNFing it, if I felt that the writing at least was good, but it was just slower paced and I wasn't in the mood, or I felt impatient, I just set it aside and I didn't necessarily get rid of them. Other books, I was like, the writing is bad, I'm not gonna like it. The characters are bad, the plot, all of these things are just, they're not going to work for me ever. I'm not gonna sit here and hope that it gets better, and so I would DNF them and get rid of them. So all of that was kind of a bonus of kind of putting that urgency behind my reading. But for 2025, I don't want to do that. I guess I feel that I learned a valuable lesson in that whole cleansing and DNFing books that just I was not vibing with. And I guess I feel that I can still take that away to the next year. Even though I'm slowing things down, I can still do that and give more of my attention to denser books, classic books, big books, just trade that time that I would be investing in a book that just isn't very good. I hope that that's going to be the reframing and the lessons that I've learned from this year into the next year. There is a little bit of a thing that I'm a little concerned with really slowing down my pace is YouTube content, because I think that ever since I started YouTube, it's every single year I'm trying to read more and more, or have a group of books to talk about for a specific topic. And I feel like that is it. You need to have a lot of books to be able to pull from to make some of the content that you want to make. So I feel like that's one thing that kind of goes into my thought process of really slowing it down. If I only read 12 books for the next year, how am I going to have good content? But I'm already kind of working on that, so fret not. I think we still have a lot of really fun videos for the next year. Series. I had a few series that I really wanted to finish for the year, and I didn't do very well. I ended up only finishing 2 series, and then I think Throne of Glass I hadn't even started yet, so all of 2024 I read the 7 books of the Throne of Glass series. I finished a series, but I hadn't even started it when I made my 2024 goals video, so I started more series than I actually finished. But this year, I think that it got me thinking about it, because there's a video I've been wanting to do, a series tracker style video where I talk about all the different series that I had started, ones that I will continue, ones that I've DNF'd, ones that I'm still kind of working on. And it started to really occur to me that just about every other book becomes a series, especially when you read a lot of fantasy like I do. It's every single book is a series, or even a duology or a trilogy. And I don't want to make reading a chore. I think that when we set ourselves up to be I have to finish these series before I start new series, because it's like all of a sudden you're tracking all of these different series that you were interested in. It becomes overwhelming. I don't want to make reading overwhelming. I don't want to make reading a chore. I just want to read books that I think I'm really gonna like. And I have a ton of series on my shelves that I'm really, really interested in. And they have just been sitting there because I still, in my mind, I was like, I have to finish at least some of my series before I start new ones. Why do we do that to ourselves? There's no need to, because I just don't care anymore. There have been a lot of series that I have read the first book. Maybe I really liked it and I read the second one and I was like, nah, I'm not going to finish because I didn't like the second book. But I can still value it for what I got out of the first book. There's some other books where I just wanted it to be what it was, and I didn't want to continue on with the story. I felt that it closed up really nicely in the first book, and there was no need for me to continue on the series. There have been other series that I've like pushed through book after book, and like just to complete it, and yeah, I felt completed, but I also wasted so much time in my life just reading books I didn't care that much about. So I truly do not care anymore whether or not I've started 20 series and finished none of them. It does not matter. There's a lot of books that are just better as a solo act. So there's a couple of mentions on, I'm only going to mention 2 series that I'm working on because they're fresh on my mind and I'm very excited about them. And that is A Court of Thorns and Roses. So this is actually a reread for me. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses a few years ago, and then I read Crescent City 1 and 2, and then I got the third Crescent City book. My husband had pre-ordered it for me, but then I decided to go ahead and read all of Throne of Glass series. So I just finished that. Now I'm gonna read the series like in order and see how they all fit together. So I just finished Throne of Glass. I just started A Court of Thorns and Roses, and then I'm gonna finish all 3 Crescent City together. So I'm very excited about that. I think it's gonna be really good. And then Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones I read a few years ago. It was like such an incredible book, and I have yet to continue on with the series. So Clash of Kings, I would really like to read this book. The Game of Thrones series. I keep getting this wrong. It's actually not called Game of Thrones series. Game of Thrones is the title of book 1, but the series is called A Song of Ice and Fire. A Song of Ice and Fire series. Anyways, so Clash of Kings. And this one is quite a bit bigger than the first one. But I also think something I did last year is like I had this whole long list of books that I had put on like an overall TBR for the year, and I've really tried to hold back and refrain from doing that and just limiting myself to ones that are super immediate in my current passion, because I do think that those things change throughout the year. A year is quite a long time. We go through a lot of different things in our lives, whether we get busy with life or we go through reading slumps or we go on a vacation, that just change. The ones I've really kind of been trying to focus on are ones that I've never stopped being incredibly passionate to read, but I've never just stopped everything and given myself the time to read it. That's kind of where I'm at right now. The next goal is I really want to read more classics, and these books take quite a long time. So the first one, I'm just going to put the author, Jane Austen, and I'm going to hold up one of the books I have of hers, Pride and Prejudice. I actually have 6 Jane Austen books, and I would love to read more than just one Jane Austen. I would love to go through all of her books, and I might do some research on the best way, the best way to read her books, which order to read them in. Jane Austen's books. It would be really cool to start reading some of those. Because I have a ton of complementary books to go with Jane Austen books. And some of them might not be good, and it would be nice to just know. But I feel like I'm holding on to these until I read Jane Austen, because you need to have the foundation before you get into these other ones. So the first 2, I think you can actually read these without reading Jane Austen, but we have the Jane Austen Book Club, and then we have the Jane Austen Society. But as far as other books that are complementary, we have Mr. Darcy's Diary, Lydia Bennet's Story, and Longbourn. And this one, Longbourn, I think Pride and Prejudice was only half the story. Anyways, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago that I read my first Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, and that book was monumental. I loved that book so much. I feel like it changed what I expect out of a good novel, and it's a book that changed my life, truly. I never stop thinking about that book. I love that book so dearly. And I didn't have very much luck with a few others of his that I picked up since then, but it is time to kind of slow down and try to pick up another Charles Dickens, and for that, I have chosen to read Bleak House. Two caveats to this. A, if this book sucks, I can get rid of this eyesore because it is horrible. I hate it. This one's going to be a lot more up my alley, I think. I forgot what this is about. Okay. Protracted inheritance case. Jarndyce versus Jarndyce is winding its way endlessly through the law court. Meanwhile, the orphaned Esther narrates a mysterious story in which the lives of a desperate cast of characters become increasingly intertwined as matters of parentage, love, murder loom scandalously against the murky backdrop of Victorian London. Satirical, moving, tragic thriller. Repression, cruelty, greed, prejudice at the heart of British society. I think of all of his books, I feel like this one is probably going to have the highest chance of resonating with me because despite the explanation on the back of this book, I've heard that it's kind of more of like a spooky gothic house sort of story, maybe a bit darker and grittier, so I'm very, very excited for that, and I do hope that this becomes another favorite Dickens. The next big classic novel would be The Count of Monte Cristo. Now, I'm very, very excited for this one because it is supposed to be a lot more fast-paced. It's an adventure. This was also on the reading list for the Game of Tomes book club this past year. Again, I didn't get to it. I was really disappointed by that as well because I had really set out to try to read this with the group because I had set my numbers so high. I didn't want to slow down with this. So next year I'm prepared to really just sink into it. And I don't know, but whenever I think about The Count of Monte Cristo, I always think of Don Quixote. The next book I want to read is Don Quixote by Cervantes. I've heard that this book is just really fun and it's beloved and it's funny and I cannot wait to read this. This also goes into a trip that I have planned later in the year, but we'll come back around to this book in a minute. And then I'd also like to get a few more modern classics in this year. I have a few authors that I would like to at least read one thing of. Much like Jane Austen, I have several books by these authors and I would like to just keep reading them, and one of them is William Faulkner. I have Absalom. I had wanted to read that book last year because he was very influenced by New Orleans and I had taken a trip to New Orleans, but I did never get around to reading that book. I do remember like reading the first couple chapters of As I Lay Dying, and I could tell that it was really dense. He has a different way of writing where it's like big blocks down the page where there's not a lot of indentions, not a lot of punctuation or quotation marks. So he comes in as a little bit more difficult, challenging read. So I definitely set that one aside because of that. So yeah, another author that I would like to read more from is Kurt Vonnegut. I recently acquired another Kurt Vonnegut book called Timequake, and this is supposedly second up there in like one of his funniest books, and I like a good humorous book. So Kurt Vonnegut. I don't even know what this is about. Humorous, sardonic Timequake makes for irresistible reading that's loaded with more important truths than it lets on. Moralizing, he has never been funnier. Then I have Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This book was given to me so many years ago by an old friend. This has been making it onto the TBR for a couple of years now and yet to get to it, but this is supposed to have coined the phrase Catch-22, but it also takes place during the backdrop of World War II, I believe. I think it did say World War II. And I think at the time that kind of made me nervous because I'm not sure that me and World War II novels always get along, just depending on how they're written, but I've also heard this is incredibly funny. And then one of my new all-time favorite authors, I have two big books to read from this author, but if I only get to read one, I plucked the Grapes of Wrath from my shelves. East of Eden, I feel like maybe goes a little bit more with maybe my personal taste based on the summary. My husband loves Grapes of Wrath, so I decided to read this one first, and then we can go back and read East of Eden later. And this one technically is actually a little less intimidating. It's a little bit smaller than East of Eden. Incredibly excited to read this book. I have two books on here. Well, actually, I technically have three books to read because of my mom. I'm actually going to be going to see her coming up next week for a week for Thanksgiving. So I might be at least taking one of these with me to read on my trip. I hadn't really planned on that, but I think it'd be a good time. Might as well. But if not, I would like to read these books before we go on our vacation next year in May. So my mom has been a big fan of Ken Follett. I'm not really sure how to say his name, but he has written a lot of books, and I actually have 2 books by this author that she has recommended to me. The first one is Pillars of the Earth, and I started reading this book. Actually, I haven't made it very far. Almost 300 pages I made it, and I don't know why I just quit reading it. I did really enjoy it, but I felt that the writing was incredibly good. It was a really fascinating story. It was really building up, but for whatever reason, I just set it down and never picked it up again. I do think that it was slow moving enough that I won't really have to go back and read it. Like, I still remember vividly what it was about, where it was, and where I'm at. And then I have The Man from St. Petersburg. This is a lot less intimidating, smaller book. This does sound incredibly good. My mom actually had read this the last time she came to visit me and then left it here for me to read, and I just never got around to reading it. But she said it was really good. And then she actually just recommended me some more books, and I need to look it up actually. Hold on. Okay, so the first book in the series, it's called My Son's Secret by Roberta Kagan. And I'm assuming she probably, when we talked about this book, I wasn't going to go visit her, but I literally a few days ago had decided to get tickets to go see her. So I'm assuming that she'll probably give those books to me when I go out there, because she was going to send them to me. She wants me to read that series as well. Those are probably going to make it to the list. We're going to be spending a lot of time together this summer, so it would be kind of cool to be able to have something to have a book or whatever to talk and share about. Then I would love to read poetry, more poetry. Got super into poetry, and then I found all of these resources to adding to my poetry collection, and I haven't read a lot of them. Now, poetry isn't something where you just read a book from cover to cover, so I think that I need to figure a way to work it into my reading practice and my reading routine. And maybe try this year to be a bit more disciplined of having specific books that I read at specific times, or every day before my first cup of coffee, read another poem in the poetry collection that I'm reading from, or something like that. Again, this also goes with short stories, because I have a lot of short story collections as well. I can't just sit there and read a short story collection cover to cover. I just feel like I get really undisciplined with that, which is kind of weird and ironic why I say that, because I'm just constantly switching between different books. Poetry and short stories, I kind of put them together because I kind of read in this kind of style, but I would like to read more of those. I have tons of poetry collections, and I'll share a couple that I have. I'm going to show these 2. They're by the same author. They're more modern poetry. I'm kind of worried that they're not exactly what I thought they were going to be, and so I guess I kind of just want to know. And that is Fierce Fairy Tales. This is definitely just all poems. They can be, she has some short ones, and then she has quite long ones. I will say they're better, the illustrations in them are better than some modern poetry books. I'm looking at you. What is that author? Rupi Kaur or whatever? I can't read her books. I don't like. These kind of take fairy tales and kind of twist them. And then I have The Girl and the Goddess. And this actually is a collection of stories and poems. So yeah, you have some short ones, and then you have some that go on for 2 pages, and then really nice illustrations in them. So in this one right here, that's all of my poetry. It's also mixed with some writing style books and drama. And then in the matching shelf right here, there's it's the small skinny one. That's all my short stories. Well, 2 of these shelves, this one and this one. And then there's graphic novels, and then these are other stuff. So not as many short story collections, but it's still a lot. I would also like to read more nonfiction, and I have 3 nonfiction books here, but I'm going to have another section that we talk about where I have a lot more nonfiction to talk about, to read for that. But as for general nonfiction I would like to get to, I have a book on marriage and relationships, The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. I actually recently found this book, An Eminently Practical Guide to an Emotionally Intelligent and Long-Lasting Marriage. My husband and I, we have been together for 16 years. Yeah, 16 years, going on 17 years. I always remember how long we've been together because of the age of my son. So like if my son's 15, we've been together 16 years. Like maths is done. We've been together for a long time. We've had a lot of ups and downs in our relationship, and because that's just the way it goes. Not like we're a crazy couple or anything. We're no different than many couples that have been married for a very long time, and we hope to be married for much longer. And even if you have like a happy marriage, still trying to improve little things never hurts. So it's a constant work in progress. You know, you shouldn't be just stagnant in your lifestyle either. You should constantly be building that relationship and making sure that you're close and all that. So I think that's something that we have learned in the last couple of years, especially, is to just give over to taking care of us as a couple more than we do just being parents, because like our kids are both teenagers now. They basically take care of themselves anymore, and they're going to move out. And then what do we have? We have each other. So making sure that relationship is healthy is very, very important. Anyways, so we have a book on marriage. Then I also have a book on parenting, and I will say that because of my kids being 13 and 15 and a half, their birthdays are like 3 weeks apart. So yeah, they're both like almost the same birthday. So I do think I'm a little bit late to reading all the parenting books, but you're a parent forever regardless. And this one just seemed incredibly fascinating to me because it talks about parenting from different regions around the world, and like how certain cultures just have like the most respectful children, or other cultures just have like the most helpful children, or seeing how they've raised their children and comparing that to your own style of raising your children. So I just thought that was incredibly fascinating. This one again is one that was on last year's reading list that I didn't get to. So I do think with these nonfiction books though, they're again one of those books that you kind of have to take in small increments. I don't necessarily want to read a nonfiction cover to cover. I might read a couple chapters, put it down, read another couple chapters. So I feel like mentally I have to put more preparation into planning those reading sessions. So yeah. And then the next one is ginormous. I really, really want to get to it. I have a whole bottom shelf. In this bookcase on the bottom with similarly ginormous books. I need to start tackling them, man. But that is this one. Douglas Brinkley's The Wilderness Warrior, a biography of Theodore Roosevelt and the Crusade for America. When I saw this book, I was like, okay, I'm not really into a lot of biographies. It's not my comfort zone. Roosevelt Ford Estate in Florida, and I didn't even know it was really a thing. We were on this road trip, we saw it, we went like, oh my gosh, what a fascinating person. So when I saw the biography, I was like, I'm gonna get it. We're gonna see. I have actually gone ahead and separated all the sections so that I can make it into bite-sized chunks. Like I could see how long this book might take me, and I can just read like every single day, like read to a post-it note, and then the next day read to the next post-it note. I've got the action plan of how to get through this book. Now I just have to do it. Okay, so now we're going to kind of circle back around to the Don Quixote topic. So I briefly mentioned my mom was taking my sister, my kids, and I on a family vacation. It was going to be a girls' trip, but it didn't work out with the scheduling because I couldn't go for 3 weeks because I had to be here because my husband's going to be working. So the kids can't stay by themselves. They're going to go ahead and come with us on this vacation, and what we are going to be doing is we are going to be doing the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage, and we are going to be starting out in Porto, Portugal, and walking to Santiago, Spain. And this trip is going to take us 3 weeks. My mom did it last year. She had an amazing time. She and my uncle actually did it as well. So after that, I started doing a lot more research on this, and this pilgrimage is incredibly famous. There's a lot of history behind it. For me, it's new. So I might be saying this to people and you guys are like, God, Mishelly, you're the last person to know. Like, obviously we've all known about this. Well, I didn't know about it. I think it's very rooted in religion and Christianity. There's a lot of history behind it, and I would really like to learn more about that history, but also read books from and around that region for many other purposes other than just the Camino, just to get to know the culture of Spain and stuff like that. So I have quite a few books in this category. For the fun books, I have The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. Leigh Bardugo is an all-time favorite author. I've read a lot of her books, and I have yet to read this book that was released this past year, 2024. I think it's supposed to be like a vampire book set in Spain. Either way, I need to read this book, and I think this would be a perfect time to read it to get, in preparation for Spain. So I actually have a few books on my shelves that all are set in Spain. I only have one on my shelf that's actually set in Portugal. I have Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I've heard this book is really good. It's the first in a series. There's 3 books in the series. A few years ago, I actually read this book by him, Marina, and I did really like it. I had chose to read this one. I heard someone talk about it on YouTube. Anyways, I did really enjoy this book, so I'm expecting to really like this one. Then I have A Long Pedal to the Sea by Isabel Allende. This is not the first book that she has written. She has like 2 books in all the books that she's written that take place in Spain. This is one that I have on my shelves. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. So my son is actually going to have to read this book for his English class at some time this year. Probably not before the end of the year. He's probably going to have to read it next year, which is going to be really cool. I'm definitely going to have to read it with him, and then we can have a book to talk about, and then we're going to go to Spain. So I think actually it's the first book. I didn't know that this was the second book. There's another book called The Pilgrimage, but this one, for whatever reason, is the most popular one because you have to read it in school a lot of times, if you live in the United States anyways. There's a prequel to this. I don't know if it's a prequel or what it's called, but there's The Pilgrimage, that actually takes place before The Alchemist, and it talks a lot more about specifically the Camino. I'm going to read this book, but I also want to get The Pilgrimage as well to complement it and to just be more specific about like our trip. And then I have Two Nights in Lisbon. This is actually a thriller that takes place in Portugal. Now we're not going to Lisbon, we're going to Porto, Portugal, and then we're going to be walking very close. I don't know where Lisbon is, but I don't think we're going anywhere near Lisbon. We're going to be flying into Porto, spending 3 days. Our walk is going to be very close to the coast, like the whole way up. And then also the famous Don Quixote. This takes place in Spain. I do plan on having another dedicated video to books that take place in Portugal and Spain. Did I say book? I do plan on actually having another video talking about more books that take place in Portugal and in Spain. And really quick for this video, I was just pulling a few books off that are on my list, that are on my shelves already, but in that video I'm going to be having other books too that were recommended through other sources that I don't necessarily own, but maybe I will want to get them. And then for nonfiction, specifically to Spain, Portugal, and the Camino. First, I have this book, which I recently acquired literally just yesterday, and I've been looking in the travel section. I never look in the travel section, but up until now, I usually go nowhere. Recently, since this trip has come up, I've been wanting to look around more in the travel section just to kind of see, and I found this one. It's called Let's Go Spain and Portugal 2008 on a Budget, and it's very much traditional, like here's all the places that you can sleep in each city. I've never actually really read a travel book, but I think this is going to be incredibly useful. It looks like, flipping through it looks like there's sections where they talk about the history and they talk about different foods to eat while you're in that area. Because this is 2008, some of these specific places might not be relevant, like as far as restaurants and accommodations, but still, there's a lot of really good useful information in here that I'm excited to. I actually have 2 books on my Kindle also already. I just need to get around to reading them, and that is Along the Way. This is like a group of 3 friends who go on the pilgrimage together. I feel like that's going to be more of a story narrative style. And then I have Pilgrimage Tips and Tricks. Oh, I don't actually own this one, but this is more of like a tips and tricks book for the pilgrimage. I have Pilgrimage Road to Santiago, and I think this is supposed to go maybe like tips and tricks and also historical, I hope. So these are some books that I also have to read for that. This year did a series of videos where I was talking about like my favorite fiction, my favorite nonfiction, my favorite fantasy. I don't think I did the fantasy video yet. I did favorite children's books. Quite a few. I'm gonna actually have to put them into a playlist and share that with you guys, but if you're interested in those. But I kind of want to step beyond just listing off what my favorites were And I listed some reasons why they are my favorite for specific tropes, themes. I don't know if you call it motifs. Maybe it's just themes, but like if a book has characters that are artists, or if a book has a house as a central setting, little things, any little thing that I particularly like, I can look back and see how many times those specific things pop up in all the different genres across the board. And it's been really fun project. I still have a lot of videos to do in this series, so I hope that you're watching if you're interested. I also have plans to take that one step further and specifically search for books with as many of those themes packed into them and see if those are my new favorite books. Everything is for the motivation of finding the very best books written for me, so I can find all those 5-star books for me. This past year was definitely a good year, and I've read a lot of really good books and a lot of unique reads that I was surprised by. But kind of overall, I still feel that I didn't have any books that just I've been obsessed with all year long since I read them. There's been a few that have been pretty close too, but I still feel like I could do better. I have a couple of YouTube content plans to enforce my goals, and that is my read it or unhaul it videos. Last year I had created a little basket with all the prompts that I needed to read, and I would select a prompt. I would read the book for that prompt and we talk about it. But this year I'm going to do it Emily Fox style. If you don't know her, I don't know how you don't know her, but Emily Fox, she's a very popular YouTuber. She creates booktube content and she does these read it or unhaul it, so I've really modeled mine after hers. And here is my unread books that are on my shelves in here. However, she has a bunch of different colors. I have limited mine to 3 different colors, and we'll talk about that in the first video. But I'm really excited. This is really the only kind of challenge I want to do to start tackling the books. I want to read all the books that I've talked about, but then in addition, do the read it or unhaul it videos with this. And then, like I said earlier, I want to continue on with doing the favorites video series that I had been doing. So I've been keeping, so far the videos have been pretty vague, like my favorite adult fantasy or my favorite nonfiction. But I think that as those videos go on, I want to get a little bit more specific niches. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. As always, are any of these big classics ones that you're going to read? I did consider setting up a book club on Fable to do some of the large classics like Don Quixote, or I might just look for a book club on Fable that's reading the same book that I'm reading. We'll have to see. If you know anything, please go ahead and share. Or if you'd like to buddy read any of these books, please let me know. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.